We've got a...
These two kids just put on a show for me in the hallway. Yeah, they just showed me the cartwheels in their handsprings. I was like, oh, it's really cool.
Regents Prep opener, guys. Up on the board.
What was I going to do? Stop them?
Let's take a look.
Okay, but they're cartwheels and they're back handsprings. Amazing.
Do a quick Regents Prep, multiple choice. What's your stimulus? If you had to pick out the stimulus on this sheet that I just handed out, what's the stimulus?
Constitution.
It's the what? It's the document that's boxed. Yeah, it's the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, dated 1787. That's your stimulus. Stimulus-based multiple choice. We're going to base our answers to 25 and 26 on the document and on your knowledge of social studies. So let's take a look. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. 5 protections under the First Amendment. They are all stated there. Again, this is your stimulus, and remember, always look for the sourcing information as well. It's telling you it's coming right from the U.S. Constitution. All right? So we got 2 questions that follow. Palin, read question 25 aloud.
What is one impact of this amendment on American society?
What is one impact of this amendment on American society? Let's go down the list. We're going to look at each of the 4 answers. Okay? What is one impact of this amendment on American society? 1, Congress cannot mandate a national religion. Does everybody know what the term mandate means?
Of course.
Congress cannot require a national religion. Is choice 1 a potential correct answer choice?
Yes.
2, religious groups cannot lobby Congress. Lobby means to appear before Congress and look for support. Is that an impact of this amendment on American society, that religious groups cannot lobby Congress? Absolutely not. Religious groups lobby Congress every day. 3, members of the press cannot hold public office. Is that something that this amendment impacts American society? What do you say, Haley? And number 4, the Supreme Court cannot limit free speech during wartime. Is that one impact of this amendment on American society? The Supreme Court cannot limit free speech during wartime. That leaves the best answer choice, number 1. Okay? And that is the correct answer. That is your correct answer for that particular question. Now, that said, question 26 is a little bit tougher, and I am not going to help you nearly as much with 26 as I did with 25 just now. Take a look at 26. Again, you're using the same prompt, you're using the same stimulus to answer the question. Which of these events most likely influenced the passage of this amendment? Which of these events most likely influenced the passage of this amendment? So take a look at the source. It's the First Amendment, U.S. Constitution. When was it created? First Amendment went into effect. It was drafted in 1787. It became ratified in 1788. Okay? First Amendment actually will not be ratified until actually 1791, but it was drafted in 1787 at the convention. Which of these events most likely influenced the passage of this amendment? So there's 5 protections in the First Amendment. 1, freedom of speech. 2, freedom of religion. 3, freedom of the press. 4, freedom to assemble peacefully. and 5, the freedom to ask your government to fix or redress a problem. So you got 5 protections. Which of these events most likely influenced the passage of this amendment? Okay? Is it the Boston Massacre? Is it the trial of John Peter Zenger? Is it the Northwest Ordinance? Or is it the Stamp Act? Now, what was the strategy I said yesterday, or the last couple of days, that we should utilize if we don't know for certain the answer? Palin. What's what?
Eliminate 1 or 2.
Okay, which ones give me one that you would eliminate.
2. Only because I don't really know what it is, and I don't think we learn it.
This would have been something, by the way, the answer to this question would have been something that would have been included in your summer reading project. This is a question that covers material from chapters 1 through 4. When did the Boston Massacre take place? What year? We looked at this document literally yesterday. It took place March 5th of 1770. Okay? March 5th of 1770. So what Boston Massacre had to do with what? I mean, 5 people were killed over what issue? Boston Massacre had to do with what issue? 5 Boston colonists were killed by British soldiers on March 5th of 1770. Why? What? They were unhappy about taxes, and they were harassing and haranguing and threatening British soldiers, and tragically 5 men were shot and killed. What's the Northwest Ordinance?
You can't go west of the Appalachian.
No, that's the proclamation of 1763. Northwest Ordinance was a what, Palin? No. Lizzie? Northwest Ordinance basically was passed at the time the Constitutional Convention happened. Northwest Ordinance is going to provide a mechanism for settling areas west of the Appalachian Mountains, and how to, for states, how to become territories, and eventually how territories can become American states. Okay? So that's going to deal with settling west of the Appalachians after the Revolutionary Wars. And what's the Stamp Act? Stamp Act was a tax on goods. It was the first tax implemented after what war? French and Indian War, and it's the act that that essentially is going to lead to the colonists to say that we do not have the right to be taxed without representation. All right. Does the Boston Massacre, at first glance, have anything to do with the protections included in the First Amendment? You say no, Dylan? All right. Does settling west of the Appalachian Mountains and territories becoming states have really anything to do, connected to anything that's included in the First Amendment? Does the Stamp Act of 1765 have anything to do really with the First Amendment with respect to religion or free speech or protests or freedom of the press? I'll say no. John Peter Zenger, who can tell me who he is? Anybody? Let's take a look. John Peter Zenger.
Before the Constitution established the First Amendment, English and colonial assemblies considered freedom of the press a danger to the state. But colonial newspapers vigorously defended their freedom. They insisted that citizens had a right to monitor and criticize their governments. In 1735, this right was tested by John Peter Zenger, a German-born printer.
John Peter Zenger was a newspaper editor in New York Colony in the 1730s who published editorials lambasting the governor.
Sir William Cosby, the governor of New York at the time, was the object of Zenger's harsh editorials.
And the governor ordered him arrested for sedition and libel, and his paper closed. And in fact, some issues of his paper were publicly burned. Zenger was put on trial for sedition, that is, bringing the governor into disrepute. Zenger insulted the governor, no question about it. He called him a thief, a crook, a criminal. And yeah, that's against the law. It was definitely against the law. But he said, if you think he was right, truth should be a defense against that. His trial is important because his lawyer convinced the jury that Zenger was right, that the governor was a lowlife. And so the jury acquitted him.
The Zenger case proved that Americans valued a free press, an idea that would become law with the creation of the Constitution.
So this guy Zenger was a New York City newspaper editor, publisher, who published articles, opinion pieces effectively, that were very critical of the royal governor of New York, accusing him of being corrupt, accusing him of being a criminal, and Zenger was arrested and jailed for his criticism in writing. And this event was in the minds at the Constitutional Convention. The founding fathers who wrote the Constitution, when they were writing and coming up with the ideas that were going to form the foundation of our government, they recognized that there had to be protections against people speaking out against elected officials, because the people have to, in a free society, have to have the right to criticize their leaders. John Peter Zenger did not have that right until he was found not guilty, and because of John Peter Zenger, the writers, the creators of the Constitution wanted to make sure that people who criticized elected officials would not be punished. And where does most criticism come in our, most criticism would have come during that period in newspapers, right? And this idea of freedom of the press is going to emerge, in which newspapers and media are going to have the right to be critical of elected officials. This is a sacred right that Americans hold, and this is why it was pretty much founded in our Constitution related to this John Peter Zenger case. All right. So the best answer, going back to your document, the best answer to that question clearly is going to be answer choice number 2. Answer choice number 2. That was a tough question if you didn't know who John Peter Zenger was, but not an impossible question if you use the process of what? Elimination. Okay? Elimination. These strategies will help you. You know it's not the Boston Massacre. You know it's not the Stamp Act. And we left it down to 2, and we were able to come up with John Peter Zenger. So that is Regents Review question for today. Once a week, when I do our opener on Regents Review, I'm going to collect it. It'll usually be a multiple choice or a short answer question. So you can hang on to today's. I'm not going to collect today's, but starting next week, once a week, I'm going to collect a Regents Review. It will be a stimulus-based multiple choice more often than not, and I'll collect that as a classwork grade assignment each day. I collect it. Let's open back our PowerPoints back up to PowerPoint slideshow number 2. And yesterday we had left off talking about the plantation system, and we're going to talk today about cotton's influence on Southern culture. And we'll probably get to PowerPoint slideshow number 3, which I've shared with you also. Remember, we have a test tomorrow, a quiz tomorrow on Chapter 11 vocab terms. Yes?
When did you get that tape on
I'm gonna wait until we finish with chapter 12, so it'll be after the end of next week, okay? Before Thanksgiving, you'll get it, you can take it home and you can work on it over Thanksgiving, it'll be a take-home test, all right? Man, you're good, you got a good memory, Taylor, all right? Cotton's influence on Southern culture. And also, report cards went home today. Can I share an important comment that I had pretty much for everybody on the report cards? Workload this marking period is going to start to ramp up a little bit. As we do more review and we add new material, the workload is going to ramp up. So I'm really going to ask everybody to make a concerted effort to stay on top of your inquisitives and stay on top of your readings each week, because the workload, it's not going to get any smaller from here on out. The workload's going to stick in marking period, and then second half of the year, third and fourth marking periods, it'll pick up noticeably. But a little bit more work this marking period, and as we get toward January and February, you'll see it ramp up as well. So report cards went home. If any of you have questions on anything when you get your report card, reach out to me, have your parents reach out to me, or you guys can reach out to me. Everybody here is passing. Everybody here is getting done what they need to get done, but it's going to get tougher, and I just want to make everybody aware of that. Not impossible, not undoable, just the workload will get tougher. So stay on top of your stuff. I am here normally 3 or 4 nights a week after school. 3 or 4 nights a week after school. Even if you don't need help with a particular topic or a particular assignment, if you just want to come in and work in a quiet environment after school to stay caught up, you can do that. I'll find a room, a section of the room where my high school class and where my middle school kids can work, and you guys can do what you need to do. Some of you just need a quiet place to work. If you need that, you got it. I'm here 3 or 4 days a week, all right, after school. Yeah, anybody? All right. Cotton's influence on Southern culture. Okay, cotton is going to shape the Old South image of grand plantations and genteel living. That's a perfect example of a Southern plantation building. Now that's a modern picture. That's a modern picture, but certainly that would be the style of a lot of these plantation buildings. Cotton's influence is going to reinforce the idea of white supremacy and paternalism. Paternalism. This idea of paternalism, the idea that males in society are, especially white males, okay, are responsible for the protection and the looking after of the female of the species. Paternalism, all right? Cotton is going to create a distinct Southern identity and way of life, and in a lot of ways, life in the South is, as far as agriculture, is very similar today than it was 150, 175 years ago during the period that we're talking about. Cotton is still grown in the American South today. Cotton is still a huge American export. It is still used to make a lot of the clothing that we wear. Every one of us, if we looked at our wardrobes today, every one of us is wearing multiple, if not all, cloth materials that have cotton in them. Cotton is a comfortable fabric, more popular, as popular today as it was then. All right, so there's certainly going to be a huge emphasis on cotton in Southern society. Cotton's influence on Southern culture, most importantly, is going to shape the image of the Old South. This image of grand, large-scale plantations. There was a picture yesterday in one of the video clips that we watched too. I wanted to make mention if I forgot. As you drive up to the front of this home, in a wagon, 1850, 1840, whenever you might have visited, the road to the plantation home, or the path to the plantation home, before you got to the mansion, oftentimes the road to the home would be landscaped with the slave dwellings that were built along the side of the road that were in nowhere near in as good a condition as what you're seeing right here. But the point is, Southern planters and plantation owners would often place the slave quarters on the road leading to the home, not to show off the quality of the slave quarters, but to remind the white visitors to the plantation of how many slaves were owned. If there were lots of slave quarters, and usually they were very, very dingy, not very well maintained shacks with dirt floors, if you saw a lot of those on the way up to the mansion, it would be kind of like the person who has his 3 BMWs sitting in the driveway for people to, the minute you pull into the driveway, you see the 3 cars, and it's a sign of a person's, affluence or wealth. And so too, Southern planters would make sure that visitors to the mansion saw the slave quarters. And the slave quarters, again, were not in any fancy condition. They were damp, they were cold, they were wet, they were not very well maintained. But just the show of them, just the sight of them would be an indication of the wealth of the homeowner, the wealth of the planter. If you saw 50 dwellings on the road leading to the mansion, and you had 10 or 12 people living in one of those dwellings, which was probably the average, you're looking at a plantation owner who owns 600 or more slaves, and this would be a sign to any visitor that they're coming into a piece of property that is owned by a very wealthy planter. So status was very important in the American South. Status and the image of status, and that would be evident in when you pulled up to a planter's home. Slave quarters were almost always visible for that purpose, to show off wealth, to show off the degree of success on the white planter's part. Okay? Let's continue and look at the next slide. Let's talk about impact on industry and industrialization. The South remained primarily agricultural while the North industrialized. And this is clearly evident in the fact that Southern planters who were making money hand over fist on the backs of slaves, Southern planters were not reinvesting their profits into making factories and to making machinery. Profits of slave owners and profits of large planters would almost always go into buying one of two things: buying more land and or buying more slaves. So profits are going to be reinvested in land and slaves rather than in factories. Big difference in the North. Big difference in the North. If a northern business owner, a manufacturer, a factory owner, if a northern factory owner is making lots of profits, oftentimes they're going to expand their operation. They're going to make a bigger factory. They're going to buy more machinery. They're going to buy more product or more supplies. Planters in the South are not going to spend that money on infrastructure. They are going to spend those profits on land, buying more land, becoming bigger, and bigger landowners, and buying more slaves. Southern industrialization is going to be limited development of southern cities and infrastructure. This is going to mean that there's not going to be a lot of job opportunities in the South for people coming from Europe as immigrants. There's not nearly going to be as much immigration to the American South as there will be to the North, East, and the Middle Atlantic states. And this is because of the limited infrastructure. We've talked about this before. Limited infrastructure in the South is going to really mean that as the North is growing and cities are developing, and cities are developing to the tune of 50, 60, 70,000 population cities, you're only going to have a couple of cities in the South that are going to be on par with the population of northern cities. The largest southern city for a time will be Charleston, South Carolina. Largest city will be Charleston, South Carolina, and even that, by Boston standards, by Philadelphia standards, by New York City standards, is going to be tiny. Okay, so limited development of the southern cities and infrastructure is also going to be key, and the fact that property owners, landowners are not going to reinvest their money and their profits into machinery and factories means that agriculture, and cotton specifically, is going to remain king up until the Civil War. Let's talk about international connections to the South. Southern cotton supplied textile mills in both England and New England. So the South was shipping their cotton north to the New England states, factory towns like in Lowell, Massachusetts, or in New York, or in Rhode Island, but they're also sending their raw cotton to England. They're also sending raw cotton. So they have marketplaces outside the United States. This is going to create an economic tie between the South and industrial regions. It creates an economic tie between the South and industrial regions. Remember, the North is not growing the cotton. The North is not participating in the institution of slavery as owning slaves, but the North is certainly supporting the institution of slavery by buying Southern raw cotton and having that shipped to northern factories where they're turning around and they're making fabric, they're making clothing, they're making bedspreads, they're making sheets, and anything that can be made from cotton is going to be made in these northern mills, and these mill owners and these factory owners are going to be making profits due to the efforts of slave labor as well. South is also going to become dependent on foreign markets for its main product. The South became dependent on foreign markets for its main product. All right? South will become dependent on foreign markets for its main product, and this is going to affect the South's position in national politics because the South, okay, the South in a lot of ways is going to become beholden to the northern states. The South is not able to manufacture its own goods, which means that the South is going to become reliant on both England and Europe and on the northern states for their manufactured goods, leading again to this growth of bickering and fighting and division between the 3 what of the country. 3 sections or 3 regions of the country. Okay? And this is going to lead to resentment. This is going to lead to huge resentment on the part of the South. The South, if you're a southern planter and you're shipping your cotton north and you're making good money on selling your cotton, but you have to turn around and you have to pay high tariffs on imported goods because you have to import most of your goods, or you have to buy those goods from northern factories, there's going to become a huge rift between, especially the North and South, because of this. And as we come closer and closer to 1860, that rift is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper between North and South, because as we said, history doesn't happen in a vacuum. And that pretty much means that while one thing is going on in the South with the manufacture of cotton, other things are going on at the same time in other parts of the country. While the South is basking in its cotton plantations and its king cotton, northern states, the abolitionist movement is growing by leaps and bounds, and more people are being exposed to the abolitionist way of thinking, and this abolitionist way of thinking is eventually going to collide with the Southern belief that white Southerners had the inherent right to own slaves under the idea of states' rights and the right to kind of control their own destiny. Slaves were indeed considered property by Southern whites. So this rift is going to become real pronounced as we move into the 1850s. All right, more on that later. Long-term economic consequences in the South. There's going to be an over-reliance on cotton is going to leave the South vulnerable to fluctuations in price. Okay? If the price of cotton drops globally, what's going to happen to Southern planters? They're not going to make as much money. If the price of cotton rises, okay, what happens? Oh, if they what? If they're able to produce the cotton that they need. So this becomes a danger. There's an old saying: "Don't put all your eggs in what? One basket." And quite literally, for large planters in the South, cotton is that large basket. Cotton is the cash crop. Now, that is not to say that other things are not grown. There are other crops grown in the American South, to include rice, to include indigo, to include sugarcane. But cotton is the one. Remember, what percentage did we say yesterday what percentage of Southern imports was reflected? 57%, almost 60% of our exports, rather, were from cotton. That is a huge, huge piece of the Southern economy. All right. After the Civil War, sharecropping is going to perpetuate a cotton-based economy. After the Civil War ends and after slavery is abolished, we're going to see sharecropping perpetuating cotton-based economy. And sharecropping, we'll get into it later, but sharecropping, anybody know what sharecropping is? Okay? Sharecropping is going to be effectively the renting of property, okay? The renting of property to basically grow a product and have some product for yourself and sell the rest as a cash crop. So we're going to see people sharing the land. A farmer, or let's say a southern planter, let's say after the Civil War I was...
Sorry for the interruption. Yep. Andrew Mulligan, please report to the middle school office. Andrew Mulligan, middle school office, please.
After the Civil War ends, I'm a wealthy planter. I have 1,000 acres of land. Slavery is no longer legal. So what am I going to do with my 1,000 acres in order to make a living if I'm a white planter? I'm going to have to basically rent out that land to people, and they're going to pay me with the profits they make from their what? From their crops. And what's going to happen, sharecropping, because of the Southern economy and because cotton was such a big part of the Southern economy, sharecropping is going to be a type of labor that lots and lots and lots of former slaves are going to go into because they have very little opportunity to do something else. Okay, and we'll get more into that as we move forward in the school year. All right. Conclusion: legacy of cotton and slavery. Profoundly shaped Southern economy, society, and culture. Cotton did, and slavery, for that matter. Both of these, cotton and slavery they're a tandem. In the American South during the period 1800 to 1860, cotton and slavery are going to go hand in hand. Cotton and slavery are going to go hand in hand. Created wealth, but also kept inequalities and social divisions. And the effects continued long after the Civil War and long after the abolition of slavery. Just because slavery ended in 1865, the legacy of cotton and slavery is going to live on, because we know, for example, that cotton is still grown in the American South today. And we also know that just because slavery ended in 1865, what did that mean for African Americans, generally speaking? Did the end of slavery, was that the panacea? Was that the cure-all for Americans, African Americans, Katie? What problems lingered and would linger for 100 more years? Okay, clearly racism will exist, but what immediate issue? Lizzie? For what? Like what? Frederick Douglass celebrated the end of slavery when the war ended, but Frederick Douglass said, it's great that slavery is over, it's great that slavery is illegal, but unless blacks have this specific right, our freedom will be meaningless. What right? Voting rights. Voting rights. Frederick Douglass and others realized that without the voting rights, ending of slavery is truly meaningless unless blacks are empowered to cast a ballot in elections. So that's the legacy of cotton and slavery, and it will persist. Blacks will not have full suffrage. As a matter of fact, African American women and white women will not earn the right to vote until when? 1920. Now, black males will get voting rights very, very quickly after the war ends. But even then, we will not see full equality. Even once black males are able to vote, we're going to see obstacles to that emerge after the Civil War. We're going to see the emergence of the Ku Klux Klan. We're going to see the emergence of poll taxes, P-O-L-L taxes, that required people to pay money if they showed up to vote. The problem with paying a poll tax after the Civil War, if you're a black man, you probably didn't have any what? Any money. So voting is legal after the Civil, with the passage of the 15th Amendment. Black men can vote as of 1870, but as an obstacle in the South to black men voting, poll taxes were placed in effect in many jurisdictions, in many states. Literacy tests. You want to vote and you're a black man in 1870, you show up at the poll, you might be given a newspaper by a poll watcher. Somebody who's there to basically watch the polls and supervise balloting. If you're a black male who shows up to vote, you might be, if you're not asked to pay a poll tax, you might be asked to read an excerpt from a newspaper, a paragraph. And if you illustrate that you have a knowledge of reading, well then you're awful lucky, you can vote that day. What's the inequity there? Slaves were never allowed to learn how to read. Slaves were and they weren't allowed to attend schools. So the poll tax and the literacy test were simply means of blocking a constitutional right that African American men received in 1870. So, and we'll talk about that later once we get into the Civil War and the post-Civil War, but just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit today, the legacy of cotton and slavery will go on long after the Civil War ends. We got 5 minutes. Let's start topic 3. Open up topic 3, which I posted on your stream a little while ago. Topic 3 is going to be Southern white culture. Let's talk a little bit about Southern white culture and see what's up with that aspect. Did I share it correctly with you guys? Got it today? And hopefully it's all there. All right, I didn't leave any out. Let's introduce Southern white society. And again, we got a beautiful mansion. All right, part of a plantation, I'm sure. Southern white society was not monolithic. Monolithic, there's a word, Dylan. What's it mean?
Mono, I know mono means one. So.
Yeah, Southern white culture was not, all whites did not live on the same plane in the American South during this period. There were wealthy whites who owned large numbers of slaves, who lived in luxurious homes like this and had hundreds of slaves. Just as there were poor whites who did not own land, who did not own slaves, and we're going to see that it was not all grandeur and ballrooms and beautiful dresses. And how many of you have seen Gone with the Wind? The movie Gone with the Wind? Okay, it is a movie about the America South during the Civil War. Lots of beauty and lots of dances and balls and Southern genteel culture in mansions. Monolithic means not all whites are of the same station and situation in life. They're divided into distinct social and economic groups. Each group is going to have different reasons for supporting slavery. Let's talk about that for a second. Each white group is going to have different reasons for supporting slavery. Why is a planter, Ava, going to support the institution of slavery? More than any other reason, if you're a planter and you own 400 slaves, why are you going to fight to the death for your right to own slaves?
Because that's how they make their money.
They're becoming very wealthy owning slaves. Absolutely. If you are a poor white tenant farmer, if you are the poorest of poor whites and you have a wife and 6 children and you're eking out an existence on a piece of land you rent, what's your motivation to, Lizzie, want to continue or to support slavery?
As long as you were white, it didn't matter how poor you were, slaves were always lower than you.
Correct. Your social status is going to always be elevated regardless of your condition as a white Southerner. The poorest of poor whites are going to be socially more higher on the social scale than African American slaves. And that is important. This is why you're going to have almost, when we say monolithic, the white society was not monolithic, but white support for slavery was nearly monolithic. Now there's a couple of students, I said that last year, a couple of students said, yeah, but there were some white Southerners who opposed slavery. Yes. the Grimke sisters, who were a couple of sisters who opposed slavery. But few and far between. White support of slavery was monolithic, meaning it was almost universal among whites in the South. Okay, we'll close on that topic. So check your phone. Okay, I'm pretty sure Marcus.
Okay.
All right.